Welcome back to Wealth Mavericks, the podcast where we help doctors unlock the secrets to building generational wealth. And today we have a conversation with special guest Todd Dathe, Joe's coaching client turned great friend, about the Freedom Roadmap conversation they had years ago and everything that has unfolded since as a result.
Everybody's got a goal that they're just not willing to maybe say out loud, a big, hairy, audacious goal. It's like it's unachievable, but you want it anyway.
If you don't like where you're at, move. You're not a tree.
Right.
You know?
Welcome back to Wealth Mavericks. I'm Erin Nevacosi, and I'm here today with Joe and a very special guest, Todd Dathe. Todd has a great story to share with us about just what can happen when you get very clear on what you want and you take action toward it. And Joe played a role in that story. Todd, it's so great to meet you. Welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Of course. So in the years that I have known Joe, I have heard Todd's name more times than I can count. And so I am excited to finally hear this story. So Joe, why don't you tell us how you and Todd met?
Yeah, I feel like this was forever ago. I don't know. The year was 2008 and the financial world was in a tumble. I don't know what exactly it was. It was probably around that time.
It was November of 2009. It was actually late October of 2009.
No kidding.
Yep, I know.
Todd knows.
I do know.
I was at the time I was working as a coach in the financial services industry for a guy named Bill Backrack. And if you're a financial advisor, you should listen to everything that Bill has to say. He's got a lot of good stuff. But I was working for Bill, and Todd was just a cold lead, really, to me. And I reached out to him, I think on the phone probably, and set up a conversation. And what ensued after that has become a lifelong relationship that I love Todd to death. And Todd, I tell your story to so many people just about the power of setting goals and kind of your journey, especially for people who are having trouble or struggling setting goals. And I remember one thing, you'll probably bring it up, but I remember a statement that you made that was like it was like a light bulb went off for me, like, oh, this is why sometimes people struggle. So I'm excited to share your story with everybody.
Awesome.
So the reason we're talking about this is because at Terra Firma, with our members, one of the first things we do with them is their Freedom Roadmap and getting very clear on not only their core values, but also what are they aiming for? You know, what are their 3 milestone goals? When, like how much money, how's it going to feel? What's it going to look like? Really putting them there and helping them get clear. And from what I've heard about this story is that when you did this with Todd back in the day, he struggled to find goals. And you really had to pull them out of him, right?
Yeah, I felt like I was pulling teeth.
And so Todd, why was that?
Well, it's been a few years, but I think then there's the constraint. I don't know. It's hard to exactly articulate it, but the values part of it is super important. Your values drive all of your decisions. And when you start to get clear about your values, then there's a disconnect or a conflict, maybe even conscious or subconscious about, am I worthy of the goals that I have? If I want to work a 4-day work week, is that really acceptable? Would society accept it? Would my family accept it? Can I accept it? Can I really be successful in that limited amount of time based on my current standing in the world and what I'm saying I want? They're so far away that, I remember at the time, and I don't have this in front of me, but I can see it in my own mind of, I wanted to make, I don't know if you want the specific numbers.
Yeah, you can. Yeah, you can.
I wanted to make $200,000 a year, and I wasn't making anywhere near that. And so just saying that out loud felt like I was an imposter or a fraud. And then I wanted 6 weeks of vacation, and I probably took one at most, not including weekends, and very rarely would take like just a random day. And if I did, I felt super guilty about it. I mean, I was the guy that was there at 7:45 and worked till 5:15, even if nobody else was in the office, And I'm still a little guilty of that sometimes. I mean, I worked yesterday, which was supposed, it was a national holiday, but I just felt like, well, I don't have anything else going on. I'm going to go to work. And then I wanted to be physically fit, have more time for exercise. And none of it seemed to fit in my current schedule. So I just, it was very difficult to be super honest about what would I really want. I'd want to make a whole lot more money than that. I'd want to live a whole lot better lifestyle. I'd want to live in a much bigger house and provide much better things for my children. I'd say, well, I want to pay for part of their college education, when in reality, I wanted them to go to college and not have to have the worry of whether they'd be in debt, so they could, have the freedom to explore, whatever makes them happy versus, going and working, being kind of obligated to not necessarily to the man, but to the job, So I've had a job since I was 14 years old. I can't remember a time after 14 that I went unemployed more than a couple of days. Just if I didn't have a job, I'd go find one.
Yeah.
And I remember, when we were having the conversation, and I had at this point, I had this conversation probably with a few hundred people later throughout my career with Bill. And then I've used the values conversation, the goals conversation since then. And this started 17, 18 years ago, almost 20 years ago. Holy cow. And I'm well into my journey of helping people do that. So I stopped keeping individual count at 1,700. I used to have an individual spreadsheet with every new one that I did. After 1,700, I was like, I'm not doing it anymore. So I'm a couple thousand conversations into this. And Todd, yours really stuck with me, not just because how we became friends and, doing all that, but for what it did for you. And I remember going through, and in part of the conversation later, what you shared with me is I was struggling setting goals because I felt like I was just making wishes.
Mm-hmm.
What are we even doing here? This is a waste of time.
Yeah.
And specifically, tell them how you recall in the conversation with the goals and how that happened.
Are you talking about the last goal?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think after we had put those things down, and you had asked me some sort of, if how will you feel when all of these are, where are we now? When are we going to be there? And how will it feel when we get there? And then as I recall it, it was something like, okay, now tell me the goal that you weren't going to tell me. And I'm like, what goal is that? And you're like, well, everybody's got a goal that they're just not willing to maybe say out loud, a big, hairy, audacious goal. It's unachievable, but you want it anyway. And I said, well, I want to be a pilot. And you're like, oh, cool. I want to be a pilot. Do you have to have an airplane? And I was like, yeah, I suppose. And you're like, well, how much do those cost? And I actually had no idea. So I just pulled out a number, and the number was 300,000. And I remember the date because he said, well, now by when are we going to do that? And all the other dates, I looked down at the paper, and the last one ended 2009. It was February of 2009. So I just added 10 years. So it was February 10th, 2019. And you're like, okay. And then we had a date, we had a goal, and we had a number, and that number was 300,000. And I put that sheet of paper in a drawer. I never even, you kind of went, at some point, the back rack program was a couple of years. I was fully committed for 2 years. I went every quarter. It was 6 days a quarter. Plus I talked to Joe every week, and I built a fairly good business model. And then we transitioned. It was right towards the end. Joe, I finished with that. I was just kind of lather, rinse, repeat, working the model, building the book up. And then Joe was off working with other people. And I went and got my pilot's license in 2014. And then in 2018, in August of 18, I met another guy who was like, we should buy an airplane. We ended up buying this airplane, which is amazing. And we had that in September. It was September 12th because it was on my birthday that I learned to fly. It was September 12th, 2018. So it was plus or minus 6 months from the day we wrote it down.
Wow.
And my share of that was 240,000. So it wasn't quite 300, but it was for a goal that was pulled out of the subconscious. It was shocking to me. Because then later, just after September, when we got the plane, I was cleaning out my desk and I found that value staircase we had done with the goals on it. And I went running out to my wife. I'm like, look at this. I wrote that down 10 years ago. And, October, November, December, January, February, 5 months minus, plus or minus the day we wrote down. I mean, how crazy is that? So that's my version.
Yeah.
Yes.
It was epic. I remember you called me. I had been thinking about you a lot, and we hadn't been talking for years.
Yeah.
And you called me out of the blue one day, and you go, Joe, I got to call you. I feel like if I call anybody else to share this, it's just going to feel like I'm bragging, but you're going to understand. And you said, I just ticked off the final goal that we set all those years ago. And I remember, and it was when you bought the plane. And I remember what the statement that you said that I felt really was very powerful to me as a coach was you said, I didn't think I was going to accomplish any of them. And here we are a decade later, all of them are completed. And, I know the power of coaching can be pretty intense for people. If someone has not had a coach before, and I've kind of all the coaching that I've done over my career has kind of accumulated into what we call the 5-10s lifestyle. So it's living a 10 out of 10 in the realms of spiritual, family, business, financial, and fitness. And then your goals, your milestone goals are in concert with that. So I'd call it like my career magnum opus is this 5-10s coaching that we do. And if someone has not had someone in their life that does that for them, it can be a powerful experience. And I remember for you at the time, you were working in a position, you were successful in where you were valued, like everything about that, but you knew that you wanted something more. And and I think having that someone in your corner who was just like, you've got this, like, I know you can do this. And you made some pretty radical decisions that very few people would do. And in the financial services world, they kind of slap you with some golden handcuffs that you had to say no to. And there were some serious consequences to the decisions that you made to basically start over. But it was with this vision in mind. And I think, we work almost exclusively with doctors, very successful doctors who also have to, on occasion, make really difficult decisions. Like, am I going to sacrifice the money I'm making for the quality of life that I want to have? So maybe you can talk to, anyone who's listening about making those kind of radical decisions when it really matters.
Yeah, well, this is part of the mental trap I referred to earlier, and is, the culturally conforming conveyor belt with whatever we're in. So I'm not a doctor, but if I was a doctor, there's a culture there. I know it's there because when I talk to doctors, they say similar things about their finances, and they have, painting with a broad brush, but similar views of how they view the world and how they view finance and how they view the financial industry and so forth and so on. And so I think that's true for us wherever we are. And so while I was successful at my former job, it's as measured by what? So I was a bank advisor, so I was really successful relative to other bank advisors. I was ranked in the top 50 in the nation 3 years in a row. And I think I was the only one that ever did it that didn't live in a state that was attached to the ocean. So like they were all from the East Coast and West Coast, and there's me from South Dakota. But someone once told me that transformation doesn't happen by doing the same thing bigger, better, faster. You got to move to a different place to transform. And I think what happens is you put these goals down with the idea that would be the ideal life, and then you get there and realize that's not actually the ideal life. That's a marker along the way. It's like a journey of, if you're driving from here to California, well, I got to get to at least, Rapid City, or I got to get to at least, Missoula, Montana. And then you get there, and that's not the destination. It's a stop along the way. It's a good place to have an ice cream cone, spend the night, maybe a few nights, but then, we're still not headed. And I'm not sure that we ever admitted in our analogy here that we were headed to California, or even that we knew that. I think that's part of it. it is back to the dream versus reality. Is like, well, some of these things you write down, you think, oh, I'm just dreaming. Can I really take more time off and have quality of life? And
Right.
the answer is yes, but you have to get clear on what that looks like. I recently just completed, I've been doing this for a while. I did the math. You and I started coaching 17 years ago, and mine's evolved over and over because the financial industry will tell me, well, you always, doesn't matter if it's a good market, you need to add more clients. If it's a bad market, got to add some more clients. If it's a flat market, add some more clients. But regardless of how the world goes, you're never really done adding clients. You got to add more clients. And it really, the culture is any client. Well, you probably shouldn't be too picky. That person might evolve into a client you want. Well, if you get crystal clear, and I just completed this exercise of what does it really take to minimally fund the life I want to live, and then what resources do I have? I have money and I have time. And, people make arbitrary deadlines. I want to retire by the time I'm 55. And what's that look like? Well, when I quit work because I hate my job. All right, well, maybe you should find a way to not hate your job.
Right.
Because if you don't hate it, it's not that, or maybe it's, well, why do you hate it? I work, 50, 60 hours a week. Okay, well, what if you only work 30? Because I find that I don't really want to be off all the time. I just want to be off more of the time.
Right.
Which actually makes the time I work more fun and more rewarding. And so, one of the things I just completed with the help, some advice of another person was, hey, you need to get crystal clear on what's it cost to actually fund this life and be honest about it. And most people, I haven't actually met anybody else that's done it. And then get clear on what your business does. I have my entire business on this sheet of paper, accessible at my fingertips. It's in this thing we call paper. It's an invention from way back, the paper. And you can print words on it. And the beauty of that is I have that at my fingertips to look at it all the time, and it guides my day. And so, if I'm looking to add a new client, they need to be in the vast majority of my life is charted out by this chart right here. This chart, I don't know if this can be helpful for you, but if I don't add a single client or lose a client, the market doesn't go up or down. This is a year by year representation of my income. And so my life is fully funded. This is about 10 years if you count it. My life's fully funded right now, whether I add a client or not. I just have to keep the ones that I have. So that gives me permission to say, all right, well, if somebody's going to become a new client, where do they need to land? They need to land in the top of the list. And then they also need to check some other boxes. Like, are they going to be fun to work with? Are they going to do the things I tell them to do? Are they on and on?
Right.
I have some ideal client characteristics that I'd like them to fulfill most of those. Otherwise, it's a pass.
Right.
And this last year has been more passes than I've had in my entire career. And it really hasn't, they're like, well, you have to take that client. They'll pay $50,000 a year. Actually, not if they'll rob me of these other things that are more important.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that's the what I'm taking from that is gain clarity around what that looks like, for you. So, and anyone who's listening needs to do that. Like, it's a valuable exercise that will give you clarity about how to live your life. Because I find that most people are living on accident or just by kind of rote process. It's like they wake up, they do essentially the same thing every day. They don't really think about it. And then invariably you get to later stages in your life, and that's where regret comes from. It's like, gosh, I wish I would have done this differently. I actually had a thought the other day as I was playing some stupid game on my phone. I'm like, this is adding no value to my life whatsoever. And in my last 30 seconds of life, what would I pay to get that moment back where I'm just wasting it? But very few people are processing thoughts at that level. We're just kind of living. And so I think, that's really the purpose of Terra Firma. And this podcast is cause people to think differently. I know, Todd, that's what you do when you're talking with prospective clients is let's just think a little bit differently and let's do things a little bit differently so that you can actually get to what's really important to you.
Yeah, it's mind-boggling to me, all the things that people say, well, you can't do that. You just can't. Like, I don't have Facebook. What? You can't do that. How do you keep up on this, that, and other? I don't. I don't watch TV. Like, you can't watch TV. How do you know what's going on in Israel? I just ask somebody, because they'll say, did you hear about the bombing in Israel? Nope. Why don't you tell me about it? Give me the 5-minute recap. Or I can just Google it and it'll show right up. I don't have social media. I don't have Snapchat. I don't have all of these things. And they're like, why? Because I watch other people waste time. And at 53 years old, I don't feel like I have this abundance of time. In fact, I've come to the conclusion, and I tell people this all the time, is likely you won't run out of money. You may or may not run out of money, but none of my clients ever have. So you're not going to run out of money, but you are going to run out of time. And in fact, you don't know how much time you have. Real quick, can I tell a real quick story?
Yeah.
My buddy Dan, he just took a different manager job, and he was talking about his old job. And he's like, well, I don't know if it's worth it because this new job's in town, but it's pay cut. And we didn't talk about the specifics. I'm like, well, how many days were you on the road last year? 150 nights in a Marriott. I'm like, Dan, if we apply a value to each of those nights, I'm not sure you're taking a pay cut at all. He's like, well, how much would you apply? And I said, $10,000 a night. He said, that'd be $1.5 million. And I'm like, right, that sounds about right to me. And he said, well, I would never apply that much. And I said, what if you knew you had 30 days to live? And he said, well, that would be different. And I said, right, but let's just go through the exercise. Would they be worth $10,000 a night if you only had 30 nights to live? And he said, yes. So, but here's the thing, you don't know that. And I believe that we're all overestimating how much time we have. When I get to be 70, I'll do this. In my 80s, I'm going to do that. Who told you were going to be alive when you're 80? Or in my case, 54. I mean, later today.
Right.
You don't really know. And I'm not trying to be dark. I'm just saying, we don't know what the universe has planned out for us. And so, it's the Lord's got a plan, but he hasn't showed me mine. And so I'm just thinking, I'm guessing it wasn't to waste all that precious time doing things that didn't add value in some way.
So true.
And I'm not perfect at it. I don't want to imply that. I'm not. I screw up and make a lot of, waste a lot of time. And I find myself sitting here in the office staring out the window like, what am I doing? It happens. But
it's better than Snapchat, though. And I
right.
have always gone through my life like that, too. Like, just so hyper aware that time is our most precious resource, and we have no idea how much time we have. And some people have called me morbid for that, like thinking you could die today, you could die tomorrow. But in my 510s coaching with my different members, you realize how many people actually don't think like that. And they do have that mentality of like, well, I'll do this when, or I'll do this someday, or like someday may never come. So you need to be clear, not only on living well today, but what are you doing today to ensure, that you're going to have those tomorrows. And like you said, you don't know, but when you're clear on those values, your decisions are easier. So absolutely. I love that mentality.
And I think fear can be classed with stealing. I mean, I've seen people work their entire life to get to the magic age of whatever, 55, I'm going to retire. And then they're like, well, you can only fish and golf so much. So I went back to work. And I think it's the fear of exploring what other possibility there might be, or even facing that the last 40 years or 30 years was, maybe not the best use of their time. And,
I think contemplating those questions is an important it's an important part of what we see our job is with our members, is just asking them these things. And if everything's hunky-dory, no problem. Like you're at 10 out of 10 right now. Awesome. Like continue to refine what that looks like. But I would say, and Erin, I don't know, like in your journey with your members, what you're seeing, but I would say on average, people are probably scoring themselves like between 5 and 7 most of the time.
Right.
Just because I think it's tolerable. Like if it was lower, you'd probably do something about it. If it was better, you probably wouldn't need us. So I think there's some interesting psychology around like the way that most people live with this like low grade, dissatisfaction with life. And I want people to know, like, you can do something about it. I don't care what that looks like. If you're, Todd, to your point, like, I've talked with members who are choosing to live in an area because their income is literally twice what it would be. Like literally they're making, well over $1 million a year where they're at. If they were to go anywhere else in the country, they couldn't do it, but they don't love where they live and they don't even need all that money, to live the life, to your point, like how much does it cost to live the life that you want? And some of us, I think, are just built in life. We're just built to go get after it to no end, like to infinity. And that's not necessarily going to yield the life that you want. Now, I'm not saying you shouldn't do that. If that's what makes you happy and that's what you're built to do, knock yourself out, like go make it happen. But if you've got just this sense of like, hey, I'm at a 5 or a 6 or a 7 out of 10, and I know that there's more, I just don't have time to pursue it, or whatever it might be, stop what you're doing. Well, they say, like, if you find yourself in a hole you don't want to be in, first step, stop digging.
Right.
Stop.
Put down the shovel, back away from the hole.
Yeah, exactly.
Yep.
So I think just that having the conversation is really important. Whether it's working with an advisor like Todd, where he's going to ask these questions, but very few people I have found are willing to dive into that level of emotion, because that's what you're going to run into when you start asking these questions. Most advisors are not willing to do that.
Yeah, it's a scary place.
Right.
It's always, it's so easy if you do it right. You just basically ask the questions and sit back and listen, because they'll take their own journey.
Right.
But it's uncomfortable. And especially, stereotypically for men, which I am one, obviously, men are less likely to be emotional. So you're asking another man to be emotional or talk about something that's sensitive. And like, I live in South Dakota, where romance and finance are the two things you should never talk about. And, it's just, but everybody wants to.
Right.
I can't tell you that value staircase. I'm actually, the call after this, I need to call a client that I did their value staircase. I have a copy of it, but it's a decade old, and they moved. The business has expanded, probably 30-fold. The house expanded 20-fold, and so life has changed. And so I'm going to redo this on Monday because we lay it out in front of them. I can't tell you how often, like, well, the world's telling me to do this and the world's telling me to do that. And I've had an offer to buy the business, and the employees are saying that, yada, 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 yada. And then it's like, well, you lay the staircase out in front of them, and they're like, oh, yeah. And it's like, what we're talking about right now, getting us closer to the top or not?
Right.
No, not really. And then why are we doing this? Well, because I guess I wasn't thinking about this staircase, right? Because the world's distracting you from that constantly. You don't want to do that. You need to do that.
So
well,
Todd,
that's
sorry.
Sorry. Let me just, or go ahead, Erin.
I just want to know, I didn't know Todd used that tool with his clients as well.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Joe introduced it to you, and wow, that's really cool.
Yeah. And it is, so my second favorite, well, probably my top favorite text message I've ever received from Todd. Todd, I don't know if you remember this. You sent me this video.
Okay. Which one?
You said 1 hour and 20 minute mark. Know that changing my family history was at the top of my value staircase, and that was a pivotal moment that was realized today. Can't thank you enough. You'll never know the impact that conversation had.
Yeah.
That values conversation. So tell the world about that. That video that you sent over.
Well, I don't remember that exact video, but I do remember doing my value staircase. My wife and I have done it together on more than one occasion. And what continues to pop up is changing family history, which isn't really changing family history. It's changing more like family legacy, because I grew up a certain way. We were limited means. There's a lot of the culturally conforming messages of life that I didn't want to live, the constraints I didn't want to live within. But I also didn't want that. It has been true for my great-grandfather, for my grandfather, for my mother, for me. So I think, well, I don't want that for my kids. And how do you change that? Well, it's got to start somewhere. And so you can't transform by doing the same old thing better. You have to move and start anew. And I didn't know that. I came out of that value staircase of, like, at the top is changing the family history, or really it's changing the family legacy, so that my kids' kids will look at me and they'll have no idea of the history that's above me. My mother, my grandfather, great grandfather, and so forth. They'll just they won't be recognizable. And that's really one of the goals. So then when you have that as a goal, You have to fund that. So, maybe it does mean that you live in a little different house or you live in a different location. I mean, I choose to live where I live, and including I researched my town has the best school district in the state of South Dakota. So I moved to that town prior to having children, on purpose, because they have the best school district. I live on an acreage. When COVID hit, I had 27 acres. My life didn't really change because of where I live. I live 10 minutes from the school so that my kids can be completely involved. And there's just on goes the list of these intentional things. Well, that sometimes has costs. Like the place where I live, it costs more than for me to live someplace else because of its proximity to the school. I ended up paying a premium for that, but worth it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the same thing for time of like, okay, how are we going to invest in our kids' lives? How are we going to encourage them? What are we going to encourage them to be a part of? How are we going to fund that? Everything from little things like when they're hanging out with the good kids, and we all know who we're talking about. Then hey, maybe we should get some pizzas and a cooler full of sodas. And when they're hanging out with the bad kids, they're like, I don't know what we should do.
Chew on glass.
Yeah, you just give them two totally different messages. You build your house. I completely remodeled my house in such a way that it can host large groups of people. And it does, so, and we did that on purpose. I don't have a liquor cabinet in my house, so I don't have to worry about when kids come to my house that they're going to raid the liquor cabinet, because I don't have one of those. And so, I want all these kids in my house, so I make my house attractive. And I have lots of examples like this, but I think this is what you're talking about is my son wanted to play airsoft, so he bought an airsoft gun, and then some of his friends wanted to play, and they didn't have airsoft guns, so I went to Shields and I bought half a dozen airsoft guns. And then I came home and I'm like, these are all mine, but you can borrow them whenever somebody comes that doesn't have one. And that way we can host it at my house.
And it's those kind of things that people are, again, often not thinking about. When I see oftentimes like the trap that doctors go into, we've talked about this even on this podcast, the condensed earning years. They start their careers a decade after all of their colleagues, and then they're exhausted in their career and feel like they need to retire early. So they feel this condensed nature to the income that they've got to earn. And so then they invest in weird stuff, and they're overworked, and they don't spend time with their family or their spouse or whatever it might be. And it's like, it's just asking that question, like, what do I need to do to be at a 10 out of 10 in each of these areas? So,
and I don't have a ton of college or doctor experience, but I do have a heart surgeon that's a client of mine who worked here, and they said, you're going to work, I don't know how many hours production wise, a lot more than you are right now. And, you're not going to take this day off, and you are going to take call. And he's like, and I'm quit. And he quit, went work someplace else, and they recruited him back for a 30% pay cut. And when they recruited him back, he's like, I just want to be clear, I'm not doing call, I'm not working Fridays. And you know what they did? They paid him 30% more to come back and work all the parameters that he wanted the first time. They gave them to him. Wow. But he's the one that had to draw the line, because if you let somebody else draw the line, they're just going to keep taking more and more, because It doesn't impact them. I mean, it's just weird or almost spooky how little other people think about us. Right? Like if you'll give, if I ask you to work a little bit more and you will, thanks.
Right. It's so true.
But most people don't think that no is an option.
Right.
And it absolutely is. I mean, we live in the freest country on the planet, so you can say no. But I talked to a young guy this week. Another advisor asked me to speak to this young guy that's an advisor, and he's like, well, if I was younger, I'd move to Denver, because I just love Denver. My wife and I love Denver. I'm like, how old are you? He's like, I'm 30. I'm like, oh my gosh, you should move to Denver immediately. If Denver's your dream, there's lots of jobs in Denver. I just don't know how I'd find one. I'm like, no. Well,
there's
okay.
Options.
Yeah, okay. I mean, don't
That's
then,
funny.
but so he'll be trapped in little Iowa because he's mentally told himself that he'll be stuck there.
Oh,
That's my favorite Jim Rohn quote is, if you don't like where you're at, move. You're not a
Yeah,
tree,
right,
you know?
right.
100%.
So, Erin, you've heard me tell Todd's story a lot. You know, you're just meeting Todd right now. Like, what questions do you have, you know, knowing his story and kind of everything that
Yeah, I
you're
would just
doing?
like to know, looking back on that initial time with Joe and feeling this almost unworthiness or feeling that these goals that weren't huge goals, but even those just felt out of reach, let alone owning a plane. And then you did. And now that's been a few years ago. So do you continuously set bigger goals now, or what has changed in your mindset over the years since that first conversation?
Yeah, I don't know that they're continuously bigger now. Well, they are bigger, but bigger different. So before it was about money and owning, a newer, faster, better airplane,
Mm-hmm.
and I've done that, or making more money. That you'll always find, no matter what goal you set, if you make 100 and hope that you could make 200, the next day you'll meet somebody that makes 400, and you'll be like, well, how'd that happen? They're rich. And the same thing's true. You make 400, you'll meet someone that makes 800. If you make 1 million, you'll meet someone that makes 2 million. I have lots of clients that make way more money than I do. And you can continue to chase that. My thing is, as I've made more money, I've gotten incrementally happier, but it slows. The first increase adds a lot of happiness. The last increase really doesn't add much, if any.
Mm.
It's almost inconsequential, and so then it becomes more about time. What am I doing with my time and the outcomes that I want to see achieved? Like right now, my 20-year-old son is just completed his first year of college, and he's home for the summer doing an internship. So if he says, he gets off today at 2:00, so I can assure you I will be home at 2:15, no later, so that if there's a possibility that he wants to go out to dinner tonight or play cards or frisbee golf or whatever it is that he wants to do, that we do it. And that means I won't be at the office today.
Mm-hmm.
And I may miss a call from some prospect or some current client, and maybe it'll cost me money, but it won't cost me time with my son. And so I think those goals have shifted of like, I want to do more of these things, and those things require time, so I'm going to allocate more. I've worked really hard to figure out how do we allocate more time to those things.
Mm.
And I'm not, I can't take all the credit, by the way. I do have a woman that works with me, Megan. Her last name's Kramer. She's young, 27, 28. This is the only place she's ever worked, and she's a true visionary. And her husband grew up as a homeschooled. And Megan's brilliant. She did college in 3 years, math major, and she's challenged. She's just a challenger. So like we'll say, well, we have to do this, and she's like, well, I haven't ever worked in this industry, so maybe I'm just an idiot. Why do we have to do that? And you're like, well, because we do. You just don't understand. We have to. And she's like, you're right. I don't understand that. And so she just had her first child, and I think our biggest fear was that she would quit and be a stay-at-home mom. Her mom was a stay-at-home mom. She was pretty clear that might be an option. And so I don't know exactly how it went. I'm sure she has a different version of the story, but it's basically, what would it take, for that to not happen? It's like we'd have to reinvent ourselves. We need to reinvent the work week, how many hours I work, when I work, how I work, where, do I work remotely? Do I work, all these things, but my priority is my child.
Yeah.
And I'm like, And I asked my business partner, who also has some, culturally conforming constraints. He's like, that's just not possible. We could never do that. I mean, you got to be in the office a certain amount of time. And another guy said, well, let me give you this analogy. And I don't know how I'm down this road, but bear with me. The analogy was, a guy comes to fix your air conditioner. It takes him 5 minutes. He charges you $1,000. Another guy comes, fix the air conditioner. It takes him all day. He charges $1,000. Which one do you feel like you got the better value from? It's the guy that took all day. Like, I paid you $1,000 to only work 5 minutes. And then the invoice says, turning the screw to fix the air conditioner, $5. Knowing which screw to turn, $995. And, why do you care that it only took the guy 5 minutes to fix it? that you're paying $1,000, and that's what it really came down to. I don't care how long it takes Megan to get the work done,
Yeah.
or if she does it at midnight. I just want it done.
That's
And
great. It
so
sounds like our Megan, Joe.
Yeah.
it changed the whole world that and so then if she could be gone and away from the office, I'm like, why am I sitting here in the office?
Right.
Absolutely.
And she was when I said, my dream would be talking, what goals do I set? I like to elk hunt. I like to be out in the mountains. And I was like, my dream, if I could just take the month of September off. And she's like, you can. I'm like, well, no, I can't. She's like, no, you can and you should. And so last year I didn't take the whole month. I only took 22 days. But, then it was, when I came back, she's like, how was that? I'm like, it was amazing. She's like, well, then you should do that every year. Could I do that? And I'm telling you, my subconscious says, no, that's not right. I'm trying to book the hunts right now. And I mentally struggle with this. Like, is this okay? What will people at the office say? What will people say? And then, I have my business partner who's like, you just can't do that. You just can't take that much time off. After a while, people just think that you're not worth as much, and you'll need to take a pay cut, and just, drips on things that may or may not be true, probably aren't true, but someone taught him that,
Right.
That's one of the things we just don't realize is we get taught these things by well-intentioned people. And then we believe that they're true, when in reality, sometimes they're just things they made up, or society made it up.
Yeah.
And then we've just chosen to believe it as well. And nobody ever questioned the actual truth behind it. Do you need to work 8 to 5? COVID basically said that you don't actually have to be in the office, right? Like, some worlds did change. Some people went remote and never came back.
Right. Those things, it just challenges everything that we're doing. And I think I know for us, like the work that we do, so most of our focus is on tax strategies to, essentially eliminate personal liability for tax. And the work that we do happens, it's literally, Todd, it's that moment. The moment that we transmit their tax returns and they see that, that's when all that happens. That's what they pay us for. But I've added in all these other things like, coaching, and the coaching that Erin and our other coaches do with our members are incredibly labor intensive. Like, it takes time to do this stuff, but it's like, my hope is that it adds that much value, but it's challenging my assumptions. Like, well, how can we do more with less effort while increasing the impact to our members? So it's always good to hear that perspective.
Well, and I will say that staircase is the most powerful thing. Like, I used to use this tool, Erin, called the roadmap. I'm looking this way because you're over on this side of my computer screen, so it's hard for me to maintain eye contact. I'm not practiced at that eye contact with the camera. But it had these different components. One component was the values, another was goals. Financial discovery, commitment, and we've just narrowed it down to the staircase. We call the staircase a focus meeting. It gets you focused. So we're going to focus on what's truly important to you. And you can start wherever you want, right? You can start with what's important about success, or what's important about life, or what's important about money. And, you're essentially going to end up in the same spot as near as I can tell. But that staircase, I can't tell you how many times I've laid it down in front of people, and instant picture recall is that they can see what I think happens. Is that they get a vision of where they're going, or what that might look like, even if it's just a glimpse. And those are nothing more than code words that unlock that picture, right? It's just like if the picture was locked in a box, and those are the combo to the box, and boom, there's the picture again. And then they walk out of your office, and the world just, that it doesn't. First of all, nobody can see the picture but them. So it's no surprise that the rest of the world's not looking at it. And the rest of the world's looking at their own picture. So they're like, hey, no, don't do that. You need to do this that, enhances my life.
Well, it's just you got to have the picture. And that's what we do with people. And I feel like we actually could do like a Joe Rogan 3.5 hours.
Yes, we could. I'm so sorry. I didn't. I would say that I want to end with this about maybe about doctors, because I know you work with doctors, and I don't think it's just doctors, but doctors have a very, they have the doctor's lounge, the doctor's cafeteria, the doctor's, a group that they get together with. They've had a shared common experience, and so they have common beliefs. If you're a doctor, you need to do this, and if you're a doctor, you need to do that. And I was like, my question is, where did all that come from? And who taught you that? I have a friend up in Canada. He's like, what financial wizard taught you that? I think that question applies a lot of places.
And we
so
appreciate
true.
that, because Joe, you and I were just talking about that, how these members that have come to Terra Firma are sort of the rebels in their group. So, like,
True.
I'm going to take a different path. And then we have a lot of people who come to us and they want it, but they have this fear and like, well, I don't know anyone else doing that, or, oh, my CPA, there's so much fear. And it's like, to start questioning, like, why? Where did that come from? And if you want something different, you have to do something different. So that's just, we really appreciate that insight. And
I don't know if that was helpful.
Yeah, thank you. You have achieved, exactly what so many of our members are going for, whether they even know it or not. Like, when we can pull this out of them, it all does come down to freedom. When we ask that question, what's important about success to you? Almost all of them say some form of that freedom of time, freedom to make the decisions I want, but they feel like they can't for some reason. So that's the start of the journey of like, you actually can, and let's start down that road. So thank you so much for sharing. I feel like that's been a long time coming for me to meet Todd Dathe. I hope.
Well, I don't know that it was all that. It was probably better when it was just the hype.
No, exceeded the expectations. Todd, thank you so much for joining us.
You're welcome. Anytime.
Yeah. So, Doc, we hope you enjoyed this conversation. We hope it made you think. We invite you to hit subscribe, join us again. And until then, go be a Wealth Maverick.